How did you help individuals and businesses to deal with stress and cope with some of the challenges, not just in work, environmental, all that's going on, but how did you really work with individuals and the businesses to get through these stressful times? Welcome to the Empower to Grow show, where we bring insights to help your business thrive. I'm Kelly Brosna, the CEO and State Director of the New Jersey Small Business Development Center Network. And today we have a very special guest, Beverly Byerman King. She's a mental health and resiliency expert and CEO of Work Smart, Live Smart. Beverly has been transforming workplace cultures for over 25 years in her innovative SOS principles, helping organizations and individuals master stress, build resilience, and thrive in today's complex environments. Welcome, Beverly. I'm so excited that you're able to make it here today. And the audience is going to be so excited to hear about your journey of your business that you have, Work Smart, Live Smart. So maybe can you talk to the audience a little bit about your journey and how you got there and how you came to be?
Well, thank you, Kelly. I would never, ever have imagined that I would be running my own business, let alone for almost 30 years that I've been running this business. So it's been an interesting journey because I started off working for another company talking about mental health and mental illness. And then it grew into, people asking for me to come and do presentations for them. And so I now have a speaking business that travels across the country and does presentations globally, both virtually and in person. And I get to speak to such a wonderful group of different kinds of people, from small businesses to large corporations, from not-for-profits to, corporate. And it's been I'm privileged to be able to do what I love.
Well, we're privileged to have you because you've been part of our program. Gosh, we met originally at our national conference, and you do presentations for multiple SBDCs across the nation, as well as you are helping us all during COVID with helping our businesses and the individuals within those businesses to get through some really challenging and difficult times. You know, it's interesting because you're the SOS principal, but talk about your key part of your work and maybe talk a little bit about, as what we had you do during COVID to work with the New Jersey Small Business Development Center.
The right tools at the right moment for the right, situation that you're facing. And COVID was a big challenge because we had no experience to fall back on. And so people were really struggling with, how do I handle something of this magnitude? And it really was breaking it down into smaller pieces. What is it that they need to do for themselves? What is it that they need to do for their teams? How can they handle, serving their customers, their clients in maybe a new manner that maybe they hadn't thought of before? And so it was just exploring, what are those tools that fall into that tool belt?
Let's dig just a little bit deeper on that. What types of tools did you recommend businesses to consider? Were they, and as we do, there's a lot of AI now, what types of tools do you think, and maybe are more available today than perhaps several years ago? Because I think that there's a lot of technology now and a lot of different types of tools to help businesses. Let's dig just a little bit deeper into that. What are some of the recommendations that businesses could think about on this? Not to give away, they still need to come see you and come see your presentations, but maybe some little nuggets of opportunities for businesses.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece because we can absolutely be overwhelmed by the number of opportunities and strategies that are out there. And so you had mentioned the SOS principle. And SOS really stands for situation, ourself, and support. And I look at those as like three buckets of tools that we have. And so what are all of the tools in your first bucket, which is the situation, that are going to help you to problem solve whatever issue or challenge that you're facing? And so it might be to-do lists, it might be a simplification, it might be delegation, it might be getting rid of things that you don't no longer need to be doing and adding in maybe some new processes or changes to that. The O is about how do we take care of ourselves. And I think that's an important piece, because are we eating right? Are we sleeping right? Are we exercising? And we hear lots about those things, but they were so important when we went through, the pandemic, because we were expending so much extra energy. But the O is also about, what am I doing for fun? What am I doing to get away from all of this stressors? So it doesn't do anything about the situation, but it helps to put that energy back in. And so we're seeing a lot around burnout right now, because we haven't been able to put enough of that energy back into our tank, so to speak. And then the last S stands for support. Who can you talk to? Who can you vent to? And that's, I think, one of the biggest values of the SBDC is that's the place where you can go and connect. You can have your questions answered. You can be mentored. You can find people who have gone through some similar things or who have tried different strategies that you can learn from. But it's also about playing. It's also about connection to your family and friends. It's also about connection to people in your community, like your doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, advisors who can help you in different aspects of that.
So as we, different times of seasons, different times of challenges that businesses go through, we talk about, you've done a presentation for us before on how to deal with difficult people, right? Or how to migrate. Maybe deal is not the right word, but how to migrate, how to, pivot, adjust, things like that. Let's talk a little bit about that, and because we hear a lot about, there's difficult people out there. Holiday seasons are coming up, and there's added stress that is included in that. Budgeting, the costs that have gone out, inflation, things like that. What are some of the tools, again, and I know SOS is great because you talk about you got to take care of yourself, right? But you also have to manage your business and run your business. What are some of the suggestions, recommendation, advice, mentorship that you can give our audience about dealing with toxicity in the work environment, dealing with those difficult people, dealing with those challenges of holidays? I know that's probably a multifaceted conversation to have, but let's have some dialogue around that.
Perfect. So I think one of the things to be aware of, first of all, is that our patience is a lot lower than what it was before. And so things that never used to get on our nerves now get on our nerves. People are at the end of their ability to cope. So one more thing tends to throw them over that barrier or over that edge, so to speak. So people tend to be not using the same social niceties. They tend to be a lot more demanding, a lot less patient, a lot more frustrated. And so whether they're a client coming into your business or an employee of your business or even yourself, we see that this adds to the negativity that we experience. So understanding why people are negative and difficult is the first part. The second part is understanding what do they get from being the way that they're behaving. So if they stomp, scream, and shout, they get something from being that way. If they are targeted and manipulative, they get something from being that way. If they start crying or they pull away, again, there is a reward for the behaviors. Now, they haven't just created these behaviors just for you. They've been doing these things and they've been probably doing them for years, and it's probably been working for them for years. So part of your job as the leader is to understand what is the payoff, and then how do we meet those needs in a more acceptable way. So when somebody is stomp, screaming, and shouting, it's likely because they're looking for control in the situation. They're feeling out of control, and they need to feel more in control. How can you help that person to feel more in control in a way that's acceptable? And probably the easiest way to do that is to give them some choices, to give them some options. Would you like to do it this way? Would you like to do it that way? Do you want to talk about this? Would you like to talk about that? When we give them choice, then they're more in control of themselves and in the situation. So understanding the payoff, understanding what their needs are, helps you to figure out what are the strategies to be able to use to move it forward. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit because you had mentioned about the holidays. Again, we are more taxed. We have less in the tank. We are more frustrated, whether it's financially or time pressured. So understanding if somebody's time pressured, if they're feeling out of control, how can you help them to feel heard? How can you help them to feel important? How can you help them to um, find strategies to move the conversation forward is really what it's all about.
So Beverly, during this time, I mean, we've talked about how to cope and how to manage in stressful situations. So let's have a conversation and a dialogue around how do you handle, toxicity in the workplace, and especially, during high pressure time. We're coming up on holiday times. There's budget restraints. People are concerned about it. I know we talked about the O part of it of taking care of yourself, but how about the businesses that are needing advice, mentorship around how to deal with difficult people and how to migrate, mentor, coach, or whatever, these individuals in these businesses with dealing with both the internal side of employees, but also the external side of their customers, right? Because, people have probably pressured and, they always say, the customer's always right, but how do you deal with that? How do you help those individuals understand and just kind of smile and say, okay, right? And get through some of this, because obviously you want the sale, but you also want to make sure that your employees and your businesses are able to continue moving forward positively, right? I know it's tough to say some of these words for me on a morning session, but so let's have a dialogue around that of how to help those businesses in the environment, both internally and externally.
Yeah, I love that. We talked about, the customer always being right, but they're not always right. And we know that they're not always right, but it's not necessarily about being right or wrong. It's about how do we move the conversation forward. And so what I talked about, the understanding their needs and understanding the payoff, it really is all about how do I move that conversation forward? When I know what's important to the customer, let's say, then I know how to move that forward in a way that doesn't necessarily make them wrong and me right, or I'm right and they're wrong, vice versa. I'm not sure if I got that right, but you know what I mean with that. But it's helping to understand what the need is. And so if they are having trouble explaining what's wrong or why they're frustrated or what's not working the way that they need, helping to clarify that. When we clarify that and we're listening, we're using all of our best listening skills, I'm making that person feel important. I love the quote from Mary Kay who says, pretend that every person that you meet has a sign on them that says, make me feel important. And really that's what it's all about, is how do I help to let you know that I hear you and that I'm here to work on it, that I understand the frustration behind it. But there are some boundaries. And so I go back to what I talked about for options. Do you want to talk about this issue? Would you like to talk about that issue? Would you like to talk to me, or would you like to talk to somebody else? When we put it into option format, again, we're listening to that person. We're able to meet with that person. We're able to move it forward. So it really is about hearing what the person has to say, recognizing what may be behind what they're saying. It's not necessarily that they are frustrated with you. It might have been a whole long list of things that have happened, on their way to get to you, but not personalizing it. But it is about helping to move that conversation forward.
So Beverly, let's talk about the internal side of things, the staff side of things, of helping a business owner, which it doesn't matter whether it's 1 employee, 5 employee, 500 employees, right? How do we help that business owner sort of help with their internal, I won't say strife, but difficulty? You have individuals that we talked earlier about, maybe they're frustrated and you don't know what's happening in their home life, but yet they're bringing it to the office. They're bringing it and it affects everybody around them. So what are some of the recommendations and maybe nuggets and tips that you can give the business owner on how to deal with challenges? I won't say necessarily difficult employees, but challenging employees or challenging situations that maybe that the business owner could consider utilizing?
Absolutely. So I would say number one is make sure that you have well-defined values for your organization. And many organizations haven't looked at those values in a really long time, especially since the pandemic. You know, a lot of people have their mission, vision, and values. They're sitting on a wall somewhere collecting dust. But those values are really your rules of engagement. And if you haven't defined them in what ways it looks like to live these values out loud, as well as what does it look like when we are not living these values? Because that's a really important part of that. We can't hold people accountable to something that we haven't defined out completely. So go back to your values. Do they define the rules of engagement for working in your particular company? They shouldn't have been just picked out of a hat. They should be something that has been discussed and that has been debated over and that we've kind of siphoned on down to this is the essence of what it means to be part of this particular company. And part of that's going to be part of your values being brought into it, but it also has to be what is the team bringing into that? And then when we hire, we should be hiring, firing, and promoting based on those values. They are that important that we should be able to stand up and say, I would fire somebody if they're not living up to this value. I would let go of my very best customer if they were not living up to these values. It's both internal and external. They're that important. And then what we do is we have conversations. One of the companies that I like, they have a conversation every Friday. Where did we live our values and where did we miss the mark on our values? That keeps it front and center so that everybody's on the same page. And then when an issue occurs, it is so much easier to deal with because we can talk about how it's out of alignment. When we have these conversations with our team, let's say there is somebody who is not acting in a way that is in alignment with how we want to be, the culture that we want to create for our organization. We have that conversation. We start by preparing ahead of time. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that leaders often make is that they jump right into these conversations without being prepared enough. And by preparing, it's not just about what is it that you want to say and where do you want to say it, but how is that other person likely to respond in this situation? Are they going to stomp, scream, and shout? Are they going to walk out and slam the door? Are they going to start blaming everybody else for what's been happening? And then we can prepare how we're going to respond so that we're not caught off guard. The second, there's 7 kind of things I talk about, and I won't go through all of them, but I think the second one that's really important is we start by listening. And again, that's not something that we're really used to doing. As the owner, as the leader, we kind of go in guns a-blazing, but we need to go in by listening to it. And so I usually start the conversation by, what do you think has been going well? And what do you think has not been going well? And when we can ask those 2 questions, we may get a very different perspective on that particular situation. We may see where that person's coming from. We may be able to hear information that we hadn't gathered in our initial kind of investigation to the situation. And then it allows us to be able to go from where that person is. One of my colleagues, Shelley Rose Charvet, is an international NLP expert, and she talks about meeting people at their bus stop as opposed to dragging them to where we are. We start with where that person's at. And we have a conversation of, what's working well, what's not working well. Here's where your behaviors are in alignment. Here's where your behaviors are not in alignment. This is what I need to see going forward. This is how we're going to monitor it. And we always, hang on to the follow-up. This is how we're going to monitor it. This is what's going to happen if it's not, if we don't see the changes that are supposed to be taking place. And we also want to reward when we see a person putting in the effort to make those changes.
So maybe give some advice on, I like that, it's the stick or the carrot, right? So the stick is if you're not following the values that a business has, there could be consequences for it, such as termination, such as performance plan, such as, there's a lot of different things that you could do as the stick side of it. What about the carrot side of it? If a business doesn't have the financial whereabouts to give a bonus or increase pay or something along those lines, I know you can do some internal awards. Is that something that you recommend to businesses that are really great, maybe employee of the month or, sort of highlighting them? What are some of the sort of carrots? Let's talk about the carrots, the positive stuff that you could do towards the business. or towards those employees. You know, if you don't have because a lot of businesses don't have the financial ability to give bonuses and increase pay and things like that. What do you recommend to the businesses to consider?
I do a whole program on the 10 essential needs. And when we understand what the needs are of our employees, of our team members, of our colleagues, it is a whole lot easier to be engaged, to be successful, to be productive. The number one out of all of the 10 essential needs, the first one is respect and appreciation for their time, for their energy, for their contribution, for their education, for their years of experience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. It could be giving somebody an hour off because they were working really hard on a project and they got it done and it's Friday and hey, why not? Right? It's not about bums and seats and minute to minute. It's about accomplishments. It's about KPIs. It's not about hours and minutes spent. So look at ways, but also understand what is valuable to each person. So giving a gift certificate for a bottle of wine for somebody who doesn't drink is not a valuable way of rewarding that person. Giving a young parent who has little ones at home an extra hour, huge, right? One of the companies I really liked, they would give anybody who was in their third trimester of their pregnancy the parking spot that is, the one that's right beside the door that's usually saved for the owner of the company, right? But they recognized that the last trimester, it's hard to move and all this kind of stuff, but it's also a celebration that this person is having a child, right? And so they would look at something that was not monetary, that was a benefit, was of value, but it was also part of that recognition. We recognize people for their anniversaries. We do potlucks. We have, summer barbecues. But there's so many things that you can put into that pot of appreciation, recognition, the way that we say thank you verbally. It might be in a letter. One of the companies that I like, a team was working on a really big project, and it required a lot of overtime. Not only did the leader say thank you to that team in person, but they also sent home a thank you letter, a handwritten thank you note to the person's family to say thank you for your time, your effort, because we know it was a sacrifice on your part as well.
No, and that's great. And as we move forward, I think it's very important for businesses, for retention, right? So there's recruitment and there's also retention. And it's no different than a business. Where do you make the majority of your sales? Do you make it with new sales or do you make it with your existing clients, right? Or your existing loyal sales that you have? I think that goes into play as well when we're talking about employees, right? And you're talking about helping those businesses to retain those employees, because it's a lot, I don't like using the word cheap, but it is. It's a lot cheaper to keep an employee than it is to let somebody go and retrain and hire somebody new, because then you deal with the whole negotiation of salary and things like that. So, as we sort of wrap up our conversation, which I am super excited, and I think there's a lot of nuggets that businesses will take away from that. Is there any sort of last sort of little nuggets that you would like to provide our audience, which are both employees and business owners as well? Maybe some words of wisdom that people may consider.
It's interesting because you said, we've been talking about toxicity and negativity quite a bit through this conversation. One of the things I do know, though, you talked about it being easier, to retain somebody. But if somebody is truly being toxic within your organization, it is actually better to let them go and to rehire or to bring somebody more appropriate onto the team. And I've had it where, people have hung on to people for years and they'll say things like, well, they've been this way for 20 years. I'm like, well, why have you put up with this for 20 years if it has been so toxic within your organization? And those leaders who've actually stepped up and done what they needed to do in order to, do the performance management, see if they could get that person to be on board. But those who finally made the decision to say, you're not the right fit. And it may not be that the person's necessarily a bad person. It just may be that they are not the right fit for this culture. When they've let it go, so many people have said, like, it was like a weight was lifted from my shoulders. And they said you can almost hear the whole sigh throughout the organization of like, finally. Because when we tolerate negativity, when we tolerate bad behavior, when we tolerate that toxicity, that becomes the culture that we are reinforcing. And so it spirals, it's contagious, and it's hard to break out of. So we have to, we hire slow, fire fast is kind of the thing, right? And so when people are not the right fit, when we've done everything to support them, we need to step back and go, okay, not the right person at this particular time. What do we need to do? And so that would be my big advice around that. The other piece is to understand that burnout and mental health issues are huge right now. We are in this kind of period right now where people are not, they don't have as much energy for issues and challenges coming up. And so we need to help our teams and our colleagues find ways of getting re-energized, whether that's putting more tools in the tank, giving them the ability to decide how to do their job and when, all that kind of control piece. So high demand. So the people who are working in situations of high demand, low control, or high effort, low reward are at risk for high stress. So the more that we're able to help them find the tools to put into their tool belt, the more resilient they're going to be, the more energy they're going to be, the more productive they're going to be, and the more successful you're going to be as an organization.
Well, and I think that that's all wonderful. And I'm hoping that our businesses will listen to some of these words of wisdom from you. But Beverly, thank you so much. And there's way more to come. We're going to continue to provide your much valued resources to the business community through the NJSBDC, but it's also on the national platform as well. So I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank you for all that you do for both internal and external businesses, dealing with the employees, customers, and on both sides, because it works both ways, that as a better company, you're going to be, or a better organization, you're going to be a better resource or value add to a customer as well. So I want to thank you so much, Beverly, for today and your words that you've provided. So thank you.
You're so welcome, and thank you for having me on today.
Thank you all for tuning in to the Empower to Grow show. Stay tuned for more valuable insights in our upcoming episodes. Have a great day.